Hi everybody, I'm Annika, and today I'm going to be talking about my chapter 1 synopsis for my human sexuality and society class. Alright, so here we go. Basically the chapter starts off with talking about heterosexuality, which is the attraction to the opposite sex. Heterosexuality in general has been praised and accepted for as long as we can remember, where the other sexualities are more frowned upon, discriminated against, and not discussed at all to the same extent that heterosexuality is. But learning about these different sexualities is especially important because it is way more likely you are going to run into someone that is gay now versus in the past because of all of the sexual revolutions we've had, all of the progress we've made at addressing sexuality and gender. So the chapter is really digging deep into what those sexualities are, how we define gender, how gender is incorporated into society, the science behind sexual behaviors and attitudes, and our understanding of sexuality today versus in the past and those differences there. So currently in society, it is debated whether your assigned gender at birth is going to forever be your gender. And sociologists are taking kind of a different stance. Their approach is studying sexuality and taking into account the socially constructed nature of sexuality and the stereotypes, the assumptions within sexuality, and the importance and relevance of gender, but also not ignoring those biological factors. So sociologists argue that sexuality isn't fixed or innate, and that it's broader and can change or differ from other people's sexuality. So just because I'm a woman doesn't mean I'm automatically going to be attracted to men. It doesn't work like that. And heterosexuality is seen as natural or normal just because of those procreative purposes, whereas other sexualities don't have that procreative purpose. So this chapter does bring up a lot about historical contexts, which I really like. So it talks about like the change of sexuality over the last couple centuries. So things like definitions are especially prominent here because queer and heterosexual do not mean the same thing in the past as they do now. Heterosexual actually meant homosexuality back in the day. So those definitions definitely need to line up in order to kind of understand. But the historical context, too, especially highlights the differences between men and women in terms of gender and sexuality, especially the inequalities between the two. So it brings up the sexual double standard, where men are encouraged to have sex and women are discouraged to have sex until marriage, and they're seen as a prostitute if they don't. The same idea goes for sexual scripts, where women are seen more submissive and dominant, but that's not necessarily the case just because of your gender or just because of your sexuality. So all of these things, the historical background that this book gives us, are directly correlating to how we live today. And of course, these inequalities are still around, but they are not to the same extent and do not have the same context. Besides the idea that sexuality is not fixed or the same as another person's, the same context goes exactly for gender. So one's gender assigned at birth is not necessarily the gender identity that they have. The gender binary, the idea that you are born a woman or a man, doesn't consider anything outside of that binary. Therefore, the gender binary is a social construct, and there's in fact no binary to hold the genders within. Instead, it's more of a spectrum. The term non-binary and queer are examples of non-gender binary terms people use to refer to themselves, while also like pronouns they, them, which are also to refer to non-binary people as, So like I said earlier with sexual revolutions, those directly tie into those historical backgrounds, which have led us to define these terms now. So the decades during like the 1960s and the 1970s in the US are often referred to as like sexual revolution time, which are important and drastic changes in like sexual attitudes and behaviors. It talks about the free love movement and kind of preaching that women should have the same rights sexually and that they should be able to have sex with someone they love without having to be married. So all of these sexual revolutions, like introducing birth control in the 1960s and making sex ed classes more education-based instead of fear-based, have all kind of led us up to where we are today. Not even kind of, they did lead us up to how we are today. But the most interesting topic that I wanted to talk about within this chapter was the discussion of compulsory heterosexuality. So this was introduced by Adrienne Rich, and Rich argues that women are basically coerced into being heterosexual because of political, economical disadvantages that they already have. So women, way in the past, they couldn't own cars, they couldn't own property, they couldn't have a career, they were basically reliant on men for everything. And it wasn't until 2015 that we even legalized gay marriage here in the US. So it was basically a forced choice for women to have to marry a man. And if they didn't marry, they would essentially, if they didn't have a family, be homeless. Like, they wouldn't be able to own a house or have kids. All of that is so reliant on men there. And it is almost guaranteed that a woman would get married in this situation. But overall, the chapter talks about what sociologists do in these situations, how they define these things, and the historical background of everything, which I find very interesting. But yeah, that was my synopsis 1 for chapter 1 for my human sexuality and society class. And yeah, I think we'll leave it at that. Have a great day.